It is 4:30 now, so we're going to begin. Welcome, everyone. I'm Karen MacNeil. I'm the author of the Wine Bible and the editor of the free digital newsletter, Wine Speed. And this is episode 5 of the Great Wines of Oakville. Episodes 6 and 7 are still to come, and you can find that schedule on winespeed.com. So thank you so much for being here, whether you're here for the first time or if you've joined us for all of these episodes. We are thrilled that you're with us, and we remind you that we'll be taking questions as we go throughout this session. So it's so exciting to work with Oakville because we're trying to explore in all of these episodes just what it is that makes the wines from this one tiny region so distinctive and so plush and so structured and so compelling. Oakville, as you may know, and as we've talked about, has been a sort of treasured place within the Napa Valley for about 150 years. It is, after all, where one of the most famous vineyards, if not the most famous vineyard in the United States, To Kalon, is located. And the wines from this region are, I think it's safe by everyone's standards to say, impressive. I was thinking a few minutes ago that a great gift for a wine collector would be one Oakville Cabernet every week for a whole year. Wouldn't that be a terrific gift? I mean, it'd be kind of an expensive gift. Two a week? I think there are only 75 wineries, but you could easily do one a week and an occasional second bottle thrown in. And it would be, I think, anybody want to give, never mind giving the teacher an apple. I'll go for that if anyone feels like giving me that gift.
It could be arranged, Karen.
It could be arranged. I know the right guys now. Thank you, Ren. And in fact, let me tell you who's here with me. So Ren Harris is the owner of Paradigm. There he is. Andy Hoxsey, the owner of Ghost Block. There he is. And Nick Goldschmidt, the owner and winemaker of Goldschmidt Vineyards. So before we begin, as we have been doing, and I think it's helpful to do just to kind of set everybody's mind right and give us all context, let's take just a quick brief look at the Google map, the Google Earth map of Oakville, so that we can sort of see the Oakville region and see where these vineyards are located.
I'm sorry to jump in, but Susan, my screen sharing is disabled. Okay. I don't know if she can hear me.
She can. Give us 1 second.
There we go. It's coming up now. We're good.
Bring up this Google map. Here it comes. Excellent. So there you see, running north-south, essentially is Highway 29. You might not be able to see the little numbers 29, but if you've been to the Napa Valley, that's the main road through the valley. And you can see outlined in green the entire Oakville appellation, which from west to east is just about 5 miles and north to south about 2 miles. So it's a very small appellation. It makes only about 9% of the wine in Napa Valley, and Napa Valley only makes 4% of all the wine in California. So Paradigm, you see right there, just to the west of Highway 29, a beautifully sited vineyard. And then we'll go over to Ghost Block. Actually, we're going a little bit south there to Ghost Block. You see the words Napa Wine Company, which Andy Hoxsey also owns. And there's the vineyard from which Ghost Block comes. And then we'll go over to the Game Vineyard that Nick sources his grapes from for the Goldschmidt Oakville Cabernet. And as we zoom in there a little bit, you see it's that small little vineyard right below, right south of O'Shaughnessy there, right on the Oakville crossroad. Very wonderful place to be along that crossroad. So all three of these producers, by the way, are family owned, as are 95% of all of these wineries in Oakville. So gentlemen, we'll get to your histories in a minute, but before we do, I want to ask a kind of overarching question to all three of you. And that is, all three of you make Cabernet in essentially the sort of the center of Oakville, which some people call the flats. And I hate it when people call it the flats, because it's not flat, right? Anybody who's been in the center of Napa Valley knows that it's sort of undulating. There are knolls and big alluvial fans and benches. And so you're sort of going up and down. But in any case, all three of you are in those rippling valley floor parts, not way up on or up on the hillsides. So fill in this sentence for me. Compared to Oakville Cabernets from the hillsides, Oakville Cabernets from the floor of Oakville are, Ren?
Well, that's a tough one. I'd say the soils we have here at Paradigm are actually alluvial fans off the hills, so we're dealing with a lot of the same soils. And going back to the 70s and 80s, I had a brokerage company going on. We sold well over a dozen vineyards and wineries in Oakville, and got familiar with the soils and been through geologists. And the big hills right in the middle of the valley here, just north of Yountville, are in Oakville. And we were told by the geologists they slid from the east side and it plopped right in the middle of the valley. The other side of the valley, the soils tend to be redder, a lot older in terms of their age geologically, and probably on average somewhat smaller in production. And then along the river, you have a different set of soil, which is years of sediment from when the river is flooded over there. So you have three really fairly distinct areas in Oakville. And we even have a blob of chert in the middle of Paradigm here, which had to come somehow from the east side. But
yeah, so it's hard to say, you're saying. I was thinking about, from a flavor standpoint, because you hear people, when they talk about Napa Valley in general, often make a distinction between hillside Cabernets and valley floor Cabernets. What would you say, Andy, in terms of how the wines either feel or taste? Do they seem different to you?
I think they do. They're much more lush, kind of a dark cherry component on the valley floors. I suspect that's because while they can't be from the same soil strata that's washed down into the valley, the vines have the ability to go down and search for water. They're just a little more healthy vines, and thus produce a great balance of fruit.
Okay, nice point. And Nick, your thought?
I mean, the reason why I make wine in California or in the New World, for those who don't know, I travel around a fair amount. The earthquake regions are far more interesting than the non-earthquake regions. And so one of the subtleties that we get is huge soil differences within very small areas. I don't know if many people know this. I did a lot of, there's a famous UC Davis lecturer, her name was Deborah Elliott Fisk, who did a lot of work on the soils between the Alexander Valley and Napa Valley, because of course the Russian River formed the Napa Valley, but it was blocked off through a second earthquake that came off Mount St. Helena, and that's why the Russian River now flows through Jenner. But the Oakville area is incredibly complex. It's very hard to just throw a blanket over the whole area and say that it's all valley floor, it's all hillside.
Yeah.
Well, we're sort of a combination of that. Our vineyard faces north, so it's a little bit cooler than most of the areas. But in general, just making wine in Oakville is just it's incredibly different, which we'll talk about in a minute probably. But I find that the free draining soil first meter or so is really interesting, and then we have the ability to have good water holder capacity below that. And I think it's a really interesting region, and that's why I chose to work there for sure.
Yeah, of course, you know, it would be so nice if there were answers to a question like this, but I certainly take all of your points. And when I first moved to the Napa Valley, it was astounding to me to realize that, as Ren was saying, mountain soils had been washed down onto the valley floor, and because of volcanic activity, sometimes you had fairly fertile soils thrown up on the top of mountains. I mean, it was a true kaleidoscope that made anything hard to pin down. And yet the journalistic quest is to try and say why something is. So thank you for letting me at least ask that question. Let's get to your histories a little bit, because Ren, I want to start with you. You and Marilyn Harris, your partner in crime and your wife for all these years. You were high school sweethearts, I understand. But you both came from families that have been in California for more than 100 years. And tell us just a quick history of Paradigm.
Well, Paradigm is about the fourth or fifth property my wife and I have owned. This is the one we kept because we felt where it was in Oakville, the soil that was there was going to be the most conducive to a truly great Cabernet. Marilyn's family has been farming grapes in the valley since about 1890, and Marilyn happens to be Andrew's aunt, and Andrew's my nephew, and I think we can thank my father-in-law and Andrew's grandfather for the fact that we even have Napa Valley to talk about, because he was one of those that helped create the Ag Preserve in '68. Without it, I think we'd be Silicon Valley North by now. And I think that's the reason we're still here and still able to grow grapes and farm. But my family, parts of it came from when California was part of Spain. We're here as early as 1769. They were in the Spanish military. Then the rest of the family came from Ireland, and hence I have cousins all over God's green earth: Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. Marilyn and I met in high school. She went to a girls' boarding school in the San Francisco area where I grew up. We met in 1958 and moved up here full time in '67, and been involved in Vineyards ever since. It's living a dream every day. It's been great.
Yep, it's a beautiful story, really. And Andy, you are Marilyn Harris, Ren's wife, is your aunt, and of course, both of you share the famous history of the Palissa family, who came from Liguria, I think, anyway, from northern Italy. And you share that same long history of farming, but then you decided after farming, many generations of farming, that you would start your own brand, and not just one brand, but 3 brands. So tell us.
Yeah, so our family, including Marilyn Harris and my mother, Dawn Dickinson, the third generation of the family, I'm the fourth. We're stewards of some really interesting assets in Napa Valley. We still farm 1,000 acres of the original Camus land grant and the site of the first vineyard planted by George Yount. Our winery here at Napa Wine Company is Bonded Winery number 9. And heritage means a lot to us, not only our family's heritage, but what's come on before us. And we also are the largest single organic grape grower in Napa Valley. Every ton of grapes that we grow is grown without the use of herbicides, pesticides, et cetera, and has been for 20 or 30 years. So
you were really early on that, weren't you? You really were. Yeah.
So we're
Yeah.
real proud of our legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be, in a minute, we'll be tasting Andy's Ghost Block, which is such a delicious wine. I want to remind everyone that you can ask questions whenever you'd like. And Nick, a little bit of history of yours, because I know that after being born in New Zealand and then studying wine and getting degrees in Australia, you had the good fortune to come to California, where many of us first heard about you because you worked under the legendary, truly legendary Zelma Long, maybe the first most important female winemaker in the United States. Yep, just a terrific woman. But then you worked for big companies, Constellation, Allied Domecq, and then got very small, decided to have your own brand. How did that decision happen?
That was purely financial. No, it's you know, it's funny. This is my 31st vintage in California, and yet I'm humbled by the two guys that are sitting with me. You know, often I think I'm the old winemaker on the block, and here I am with two guys that have been here way longer than me. So it's really awe-inspiring, especially to be part of an amazing appellation like Oakville. I mean, it's just incredible. But yeah, I am from New Zealand. I trained in Australia. My second degree is in organics and biodynamics, and I'm actually lucky enough to be buying some fruit from Andy as well, which has been he's been a tremendous supporter for me. And then I went into viticulture and enology in Australia. But my big growing up though really happened in Chile, because I was making wine during the era of Pinochet and trying to make wines in Chile during there. And I was actually fortunate enough to go to Argentina during the Junta in '74 with my grandfather, and actually because he owned wineries in Argentina. But coming to California for the first time in '89, we were laughing about, you know, bringing back baseball. You know, '89 was the year the Giants and the A's and the earthquake, and that was my first experience in a California earthquake. I felt like I was home in New Zealand, you know. But yeah, those large corporations were incredible. I got to meet the best winemakers, work with, as you said, Zelma Long, who to me has always been my all-out mentor. And but the advantage that I had was I got to running a small. Remember, Constellation was a lot smaller back then. Running Allied Domecq, which included a lot of wineries in Napa, but I got to know Rutherford, Oakville, and Yountville inside out, and I chose Oakville of the three. And I was so lucky to find a couple of growers that would support me in my endeavors to try and equilibrate or equalize Alexander Valley to Oakville, and trying to find some of the best wines and best properties that I could ever imagine. And so, yeah, that led me to Oakville. And so I'm so lucky to be a part of that appellation.
So Nick, we have a question coming in right now from Sean for you, which is, we can see a whiteboard behind you, and it looks like that there's a little curve. I won't even say what it looks like to me, but anyway, what is that curve? Everybody wants to know.
You know, my first degree is in engineering, so I kind of draw stuff. So this is one of my basic drawings. This is, when we talk about flavor, tannin, and bricks, if this is flowering and this is harvest, this is time. Acidity increases and decreases as we get closer to harvest. Bricks start off relatively low and increase as we get closer to harvest. Flavor starts off low, increases, and tannins for me move from green to dusty to dry to ripe. And in Bordeaux, where these three things meet, is 100 days. The reason why I live in California is we don't have 100 days. We have 130 to 140 days. We have all that extra time to find maturity of tannin, maturity of flavor without having this inclement weather. I mean, when was the last time you guys had a really good bottle of New Zealand Cabernet? That would be never. This is why I live in California, and this is why I chose Oakville, the best of the best.
All right. Well, we want to get to the tasting now. Ren, I want to tell you that Engie and John Forey, it looks like, want to say hi to you. This is like old home week. We're getting all these questions of people who want to say hi. But let's start in on the wine. So we're going to start, Ren, with your paradigm. And one of the things that we decided to do early on in this fabulous series of Oakville, 7 sessions of Oakville, is, and 3 vintners each time. So we really, it's a great immersion. I'm loving it myself as a journalist. We decided to make sure that every wine maker and owner tastes all 3 wines. So, but Ren, I want to hear your thoughts on your own wine. And this wine, from the very beginning, has been made by Heidi Barrett, with whom I know you have a very long friendship.
That's true. Heidi, actually Heidi's dad, Dick Peterson, helped me design the winery. When it came time to actually make the wine, he turned me over to Heidi, who I already knew. As I first met Heidi back in, I guess it would be the late 60s. She was, I think, in high school, and I was up Beaulieu for one reason or another, and her dad was a winemaker there. And I think she was 13 at the time, and I believe that was 50 years ago.
She made great wine as a 13-year-old, though. I mean, just really killer wine. Yeah.
We everything we make wine from, we grow. So which is good in that your grapes are less expensive, but it puts you in a position to, if you want to add complexity, you've got to play different rootstocks, different clones. The 16 you're drinking here is got, I believe, about 10% Merlot in it, or 9% Merlot, a little Cabernet Franc, and a little Petit Verdot. And that varies from year to year. And then the Cabernet itself is really in 11 different blocks, and the rootstocks and clones vary, so we get some variety or nuances in our wine. If we had it all in the same clone and similar soil, I think it would be a little less interesting. And in the wine we're drinking here today, the 16 was pretty much the ideal growing year.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
This is the 16.
We started picking our Cabernet on the 21st of September and finished it on the 30th. That's the earliest I've ever finished Cabernet in my 56 harvests.
So let me ask you a question about that. Let me interrupt you for a second on this. So it's 2016, it's an early harvest, and it's a condensed harvest in a sense. And now let's say it's 2017 and it's the late spring and you're beginning to taste, or of course you've been tasting all along, but you're now tasting that wine. At what point do you say to yourself, or can you know, it always surprises me when people say they can know, that, oh, this is going to be really good, or, oh, I hope this turns out okay, I'm not sure. I mean, do you know off the, I mean, you've had a lot of vintages under your belt, so to speak. At what point do you know?
I think you pretty much know, and it maybe it's not so much knowledge as it's just an expectation. In 64 was the first year I had anything to do with harvest up here, and that was basically coming up on weekends and hauling grapes or what have you. But the only year I can remember that you say was really a problem was 72, when we had 12 days of rain before Cabernet got ripe and it rotted on the vines and it was a mess. That's the only time that happened. And I've been here for 56 harvests now.
56?
Yeah.
Wow.
And in 1970, we had a miserable harvest. The quality of the wine was great, but we lost about 70% of the crop to frost. And that's only happened once in my whole time here.
Yeah.
And I'd say the 16 here would be at least the 5th vintage in a row, starting with 2012 and going right up to last year, where we've had a collection, I guess, that in a row. And you kind of expect you're going to have a good one. I don't, I pretend to be a lot more of an amateur at winemaking. I consider myself more a farmer, and I think I can deliver Heidi a pretty good a ton of grapes. And we also have Mark Fossey here, who's my GM and also a well-qualified winemaker. And between the two of them, we don't really miss. Even 2011, which was the last difficult year, we outweighted the storm, and I was out there with leaf blowers for days, blowing water off bunches and leaves. And it's not our greatest wine, but it certainly was a decent one.
Well, this
And
wine certainly doesn't miss, to use your word. I love its lushness, and I love the fact that it's not overwrought. It's really very, I think I can use the word beautiful and classic. We just have a question coming in, though, that I want to ask all of you, and then we're going to go to Andy's wine. This is an interesting question from Radhika, I think. I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but this person may be a journalist too, because she's trying to pin down, just like I usually do, which is, what percentage of the taste of an Oakville wine would you say can be attributed to the land? And what percentage to your choices in managing those vines and the choices you make in vinification? Can you give is it 50-50? Land, 50 winemaking, 90-10? What would you, just one answer. Ren, what would you say?
I would say it's, we're gifted with great land, unusually good weather compared to every other wine region I've ever visited. And as long as the winemaker doesn't mess it up, we're probably going to have a good bottle of wine. So I'd say the winemaking, while absolutely vital, isn't going to get anywhere without the ingredients going into it initially being superior quality. So I'd say without the weather and without the soil, you don't stand a prayer. And fortunately, we've attracted a lot of.
So is it 90-10? Is it 90-10 land winemaking?
I would give it something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Andy, what would you give it?
I would agree with the 90-10 as far as the grapes that come from the field and the winemaking, maybe even 85-15. But of that grapes coming from the field, well, I mean, yes, the weather's perfect. Yes, soil is an important, but the things that you can do in the field, shoot thinning, leaf pulling, can have a tremendous effect. I think from that point of view, I think it's 50-50.
Ah, okay.
I mean, you have to make the right decisions at every.
That's a good point.
No matter, again, we're in the best weather, great soils, but you can make different wines by the practices that you implement.
Yeah. All right, we're coming back to your wine in 1 second, Andy, but Nick, give us your percentage. Land versus winemaking.
I was driving tractors this morning too, so it's all I know is driving tractors. But I would break it. I would say, to me, land is only 20%. I think that I'm not talking stupid places. I mean, I'm talking about ideal, but the farming of that land would be 50%. So choosing the right row orientation, the right rootstock, the right clone, choosing the right canopy, the right way you're going to manipulate. So I would say land is 20, viticulture is 50, and that leaves winemaking at 30.
Okay, adds up to 100. All right, let's go to the Ghost Block. Let's all three of us taste the Ghost Block. And Andy, as we're tasting your wine, I want to hear your thoughts on this wine. Also, Suzanne Groth, who I know you know, another Oakville vintner, and I'm sure a friend, has asked a question about the biggest difference in Napa today compared to your memories when you were growing up here and just starting being a part of the family business. Leave it to Suzanne Groth to ask a good, interesting question.
So, current technology, if you will, has changed tremendously. I know, I mean, Ren commented that he delivered grapes to various wineries for his father-in-law, my grandfather. My memory was in those days, we grew a tremendous amount. I would say 2/3 to 3/4 early season whites. So we were growing
That's right.
Chenin Blanc, Gray Riesling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And your reds were grown typically in Calistoga. What has changed is Davis has cleaned up leaf roll, red leaf, better rootstock, all kinds of things. And so we see this migration of, and I know you can find isolated cases of martini growing reds in Carneros, but by and large, south of Yountville, the Yountville Hill South, was much more white than it is today. It's been a tremendous change.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago in Napa Valley where you had dozens of white varieties, including obscure things like green Hungarian that people have barely ever even heard about. But it's not unusual when you talk to, at least for me, when I talk to people who have been on the land for a while, to say that when they bought their land, it either was in a prune orchard, I think that was your case, Ren, at one point, or it was in some obscure white variety and was kind of ragtag and just making okay basic white jug wine. It's
Well,
an astounding thing.
a lot of the Valley's production went to the various co-ops.
Co-ops.
And when you
Yeah.
pulled your grapes in, it either went into the LDR, light dry red, or the DDR tank, dark dry red. So, I mean, people didn't even talk. They were even field blends, but people have figured out how to do the marketing spin and called, oh, this is a field blend. But in some ways, those old vineyards were various varieties. You couldn't even call it Cabernet or Merlot.
No, certainly not. Tell us about what you think about this Ghost Block and why it's called Ghost Block. Tell us about what you think about its flavor. What do you like about its flavor?
So in our case, Ghost Block, we make 2 Cabernet Sauvignons, and the Ghost Block vineyard itself is on the Yountville side of the hill. And that name came up because it's right next to the Pioneer Cemetery. And the local townspeople in Yountville think they see George Yount's ghost go up through this vineyard. When I came back to the farm, my grandfather called this field the cemetery field. I couldn't put that on a bottle of wine, but back in the 80s, 86 or something like that, I heard the story, probably a vet at a local bar, but I heard the story about George Yount's ghost climbing the top of the hill through this vineyard, and we trademarked it. So
he went through that cemetery and vineyard right after he stopped at Bouchon Bakery and the French Laundry. It was on the way, you know.
Yeah. So Ghost Block Oakville Estate, because the winery is in Oakville, we can't call our Yountville side Yountville. So we're using the name Ghost Block as a brand name. And this wine, Ghost Block Oakville Estate, is on the Oakville side. It's one of our smaller vineyards. It's 32 acre, right on Highway 29.
Let me ask you a question about the wine itself. We've got lots of questions coming in, and David Chu, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is asking about laying all of these wines down. And let me ask you though, Andy, since we're talking about the Ghost Block right now, this is a very juicy wine that you can easily drink right now. I mean, it's very expressive, lots of deliciousness, but it's also very structured. When you think about laying this down, I'm sure people ask you.
At least 10 years.
Oh yeah.
We're drinking 6s and 8s right now, and they're just wonderful. They age pretty well. We like the structure of this particular vineyard. We like the dark cherry component that comes out of it.
You know, one of the, I'm just going to say to David too, you know, we all know that wine isn't a cake. It's not ready at a certain moment. But in my experience, I don't know, I have in my own cellar Napa Cabernets going back to, I guess, the 70s, an occasional bottle before that earlier that was usually a gift. But a good number of wines going back to the 70s. And I don't know, from a great vineyard in Oakville, seems to me 30, 40 years is not an unrealistic assumption because the wines have such beautiful balance.
Yeah.
Nick, let's go to you and then you can all take me to task for that comment. I don't know, but let's taste the Goldschmidt. Here's the bottle, as you can see, with this beautiful cursive writing, which they don't even teach in school any longer. I don't know who you're going to get to do this label pretty soon. 20 more years, Nick. No one will be able to do cursive writing. But okay, tell us about this wine.
Yeah, so we call it Game Ranch for two reasons. That there's a there was a fish hatchery over on Silverado Trail, so that's where the name originally came from. And I live on in a fish hatchery in Dry Creek, so there's a connection between the two. So that's and that's a bit deep. But that's how we came up with the name Game Ranch. The
you couldn't have done something like Paradigm, something with great philosophical
no, it's
meaning.
fish, man. I love fishing. I'm from New Zealand. We sail, we fish, we ski. You know, we're outdoor people. So
you should have asked Ren for advice on this. So you just should have.
no, I was thinking, Ren, we should go fishing then. Yeah, what I chose Oakville. I'd been making a lot of wine in Yountville and then and in Rutherford, as I said, but I chose Oakville because for me it's all about elegance. And Oakville, for me, is the most elegant appellation of them all. And I find that the tannins just wrap the tongue. I find the tannins here are so silky, so long, and just seamless. It's the one appellation that I work on that I consider the tannins to be seamless. Secondly, for me, one of the things I like about the Alexander Valley is the brightness that I get from the acidity. Oakville is, for me, the equivalent. I get really good acidity. And Oakville, yeah, you can argue that Yountville is going to have a little bit better, a little bit more acidity. But for me, Oakville, the acidity, the tannin, and the alcohol all come together perfectly, and that's why I love this area. I've always my neighbors pick a little bit later than me, but typically this is one of the earlier places that I'm one of the first people to pick in Oakville because I have an aversion to alcohol. But I wanted the question that you asked earlier. I know I haven't been in the valley for 50 years, but I've only been in the valley for 30 years. But the big changes that I saw, and I came in 89, 90 during the replant process because of phylloxera. So the changes that I saw was the cleanup of the wines. When I first came, the level of Brettanomyces was pretty high in Napa. These days, that's gone. That's all been cleaned up. But there's been an alcohol surge, and now I think we're coming back into balance.
I do too.
And for me, longevity, you know, when Kim Jong-un drops a nuclear bomb and we all run to the bunker, we got to choose carefully. And I think that we want to choose wines that have this vibrancy and life, and we've really got to bring that together. And I really think that this appellation can do that. And
even if we're not running to a bunker, freshness matters. And you know, Ren, I want to get your take on this because tasting all three of these wines, and now I'm going to taste backwards and taste Goldschmidt and then go to Ghost Block and then Paradigm. But it seems to me that that's always mattered to you because Paradigm wines are never, as I was saying, never overwrought. There's always this beautiful line of freshness. And wouldn't you say that's important in Cabernet?
I think it's important in all the varieties we grow. And we pick by pH.
Don't tell us. That's way too much chemistry for a Zoom tasting.
But I'm just saying, I
way
think
too much chemistry.
The flavor of the berries themselves and the pH, which we get something around 3.56, we feel is pretty ideal. And at that point, the sugar will be, and acids will be about what you want. And then we try to manage the tannins so they come out soft and silky, as opposed to maybe a little harsh. And in terms of ageability, In fact, we put an extra long cork in our bottle. You might have noticed it in pulling it.
I do. It's a long cork. Yeah.
And the reason is we've discovered that our 91s are still drinking remarkably well. And that's the first year we made wine. So we, about 15 years ago, we started using the longer cork because we realized they're going to be around. I may not be here, but there's my, grandkids and so on to think about.
Yeah.
No, I think it's, I guess you have to, every year is a little different and every vineyard is a little different. But I think this is where winemaking talent comes into play, is getting that balance and also managing your tannins is a huge part of the deal.
Yeah.
I like to
to Andy's point about that the 10 years, Andy, I do want to say that while it seems to me there's a real, as Ren is suggesting too, a real long horizon for ageability, I personally love these wines at 10 years. And I love them at 10 years, even though they could go a lot longer, because I don't know, there's at a 10-year mark, you can feel, it feels young and it feels starting to feel old. And that juxtaposition of being, it's like all of us, we all wish we were 40 again, right? You're kind of young and kind of old. It's like the perfect moment.
Yeah.
I'm past that. You guys are past that, I can tell. But there's something about that 10-year mark. I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do think the lower alcohol wines age better. When you get
Yeah.
the really high alcohol wines, that's all you get later on.
Meaning over 15, or what do you mean by high?
And it's really not, I mean, I applaud, as a grower, I applaud Nick for not wanting 26 degrees bricks or something up there. But it's also not always the fault of the winemakers that were making these high alcohol wines. The conversions these days, when I was at Davis, you could multiply your picking point that you picked by 0.55, and that would automatically be your alcohol. Today, it's all over the board. They've bred new yeast strains at Davis that are not susceptible to being stuck fermentations because of a problem. And now they're more efficient at producing alcohol. So it could be 0.65 or something more like that. So, it's not always the grower's fault. I mean, even at 23, you're getting up around 14.
Yes. This is an important point for everyone watching. After phylloxera came to the Napa Valley again, the second time in the early 1980s, and by the early 1990s, lots and lots of vineyards, a reported 80% of Napa Valley vineyards were replanted with this now beautiful plant material that was virus-free and really these, photosynthetically, these beautiful vines that could really translate sun into sugar very efficiently without viruses and other things. And so it became a whole new world in terms of alcohol, conversion to alcohol. I agree. Let me ask you.
You mentioned the 2011 earlier.
Yeah, Ren did, yeah.
A tough year. But I think the alcohols are slightly lower in that year. People were anxious to get fruit off. And some of them, I don't think they're typical, but some of them are drinking very, very well. They really are aging wonderfully.
Yeah.
Yep, I think so too. Let me ask all of you, because we have a question coming in from Rick at Ohio State University, asking about the key differences and similarities between Oakville and Rutherford, which of course sits side by side. Rutherford is just north of Oakville. This is a very logical question. A lot of people wonder that. I know for myself, I'm not sure I could tell the difference. Well, I know this, I would try. but I wouldn't bet money on it, on my ability to tell the difference. Although Oakville is might be climatically a little cooler, so a little bit more southern.
That
Is
would be
there-
my perception too.
Yeah.
I came at Davis, they talked about the regions, and we go from region 1, 2, and 3 up in Calistoga. And with the talk of climate change, they might have grown a little bit. But from our experience, the fog kind of ends. The fog that comes in off
Yeah.
San Pablo Bay kind of ends right here in Oakville. And so this part of the valley gets a little more of the morning fog, and so it's not as apt to get over 100 degrees during the season.
Yeah.
A little more balanced.
Let me ask you if any of you have a comment on each other's wines.
Well,
Don't say not good, say great.
no, I'd say all three of these are classic examples of a great Napa Valley Cabernets. And, we all have I'm sure we do things a little differently one from the other. There isn't only one, it's not a recipe. You're not putting together a cake or something. I think you mentioned that earlier. But no, I think Oakville has, 75 or so wineries in it. And
Right.
Rutherford, being directly northwest, has a lot of good wines as well. They have some big deposits of very, very heavy clay soils, which is a bit of a downer if you're growing grapes. But Lord knows there's some great wines up there, and north and south of us here too. No, I think the wines in Oakville, and there's a whole lot of good ones. We've already tasted some on this series earlier in the week and whatnot. I think it's kind of the sweet spot, and I think Andrew's right in terms it's kind of the line where the fog gets up here but doesn't always go much further, and it's slightly cooler.
That's right. That's why it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes a difference. Yeah.
All right. Thoughts about each other's wines, though?
Yeah, I think Paradigm, I just love it's full. It's completely, it's not just a thin line, it's like a full line, it's a complete textural, lush, and very even. That's an amazing wine. And it's quite different to Andy's, because for Andy's, I get this line and then I get this kick at the end. I find the tannins, I hate to, it's almost, I hate to say this, Andy, but just a touch of Rutherford. Like the tannins are just fine, but there, and I really like both of them. I think they're completely different to mine, and all three are completely different. And it goes to show there is some versatility in Oakville itself. But
and
when I'm on the road,
one difference there too is that the Ghost Block is a year younger.
that's the difference.
And that's that bit at the end. That's exactly what I pick up as well. And I'll bet you a year from now we wouldn't be saying that.
The Ghost Block is 100% Cabernet too, and instead of the blend of the Bordeaux variety.
Yeah.
That
We have
makes-
an interesting question
mine's
coming
100%
in that
too.
we have an interesting question coming in that I'd like all of you to address, because we've just been talking about Oakville's position south of Rutherford, still getting that cooling fog, very helpful, and of course diurnal temperature fluctuation. The difference between the warmest part of the day and the coolest part of the night is really nice in Oakville. That's super helpful to making wines that are both lush on the one hand, but fresh on the other. But the question coming in is, how is climate change changing Oakville? Is it changing Oakville?
Yeah, I think it
Anyone
is.
wanna take that? Yeah.
And this comes from being the old guy here. I remember fighting frost back as far as 65 and 6. we almost don't have a frost season anymore. We had a little bit of one this year, but it used to be a lot bigger deal. And 1970 was the frost year to beat all frost years. We had 23 nights in a row where it got as low as 21.
Ooh.
People that had sprinkler systems that you keep adding water until it gets all melted off. Well, they turn your sprinklers on so early. If they didn't run out of water, the ice buildup was so big, the chutes all broke because of the weight of the ice.
God.
That was more frost than we had in every other year put together since I've been here. But and also I think it has something to do with the question you had earlier about white varietals and whatnot. It's warmer enough where the white varietals have moved further south. When we bought Paradigm, we had white Riesling, Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir, a very early season red. A lot of it had to do with getting your grapes off early in the picking season as opposed to late. And that's changed. Where we're going, I don't know, we read a lot about it today with the COVID-19 and, you know, the climate changing, the sea rising and all that. But I would say it's definitely changed in some ways for the better, in that you're bringing new areas into premium reds. You can see that into the Okanagan Valley in Canada and Washington and even parts of Oregon. I don't know where it ends, but we're seeing Cabernet grown where probably 50, 60 years ago it wouldn't be considered.
Yeah.
I think most of the change though happened in 88, 89. I think that you got two masterminds here with Andy and Ren who both got old vineyards, but in 89, there were those. I'm not a big clonal fan, Karen. I think that these clones were selected for tonnages and sugar accumulation. So these old vineyards that are becoming more rare are the pride and joy of what great wine is all about. These are the wines that have longevity. These clones were selected primarily from Davis and other places, you know, perhaps for not the correct reasons. And now you've got climate change thrown on top of this. I actually, personally, I think the quality of Cabernet is actually going to improve as we get global warming, but we have to consider the change that occurred with the use of clones, and rather than massal or mass selections, which I still seek, and I know I get some praise from Andy that I like that.
Well, everyone, I want to say, Andy, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm of the opinion, and I have no evidence to prove this, but on the climate change issue, the last several summers, I don't think we've had 6 days, much less that are over 100. And so I don't see a warmness in general. That being said, those 6 days were tremendously hot. 110, 112, you know, Mojave Desert kind of hot. And
I agree with Andrew, except the difference I don't think is the high temperature. I think it's the nighttime temperatures go as low.
doesn't go as low.
That's what I've noticed
Yeah.
more. Hence less frost.
Yeah.
And that is true. We are getting frost.
Well, I guess we could all chalk it up to the new non-normal.
Yeah.
Climate change isn't just about warming, right? It's about a slight unknown, a slight chaos. It's we're not always entirely sure of what's coming. And it's a cool year so far in the Napa Valley, which is a pretty interesting idea. It's been raining, it's been cool every morning. Almost all of us are putting on jackets, and it's the end of May. But with that, I think it's time to thank all three of you gentlemen. This has
Let's have a drink to Karen, and thank you
Karen,
for hosting us. And come pay us a visit someday.
I will come and visit. Of course I will. You're just down the road.
Thank you for helping us out in Oakville here.
My pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, everyone who joined us. Thank you for asking such fabulous, intelligent questions. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them. but we are super grateful for your participation and for your enjoyment drinking Oakville wines. And if you didn't get a chance to buy these ahead, I can say I think they're really worthy of your attention, and choose some Saturday night soon. Go on wine.com or Vivino and grab a few bottles. I know you'll enjoy it. I'm Karen MacNeil. I'm the author of the Wine Bible. I'll see you for episode 6, and the schedule is on winespeed.com. Thank you.